Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to our next session of reading Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws. Today, we're going to be looking at Book 3 of the Spirit of Laws, which deals with the focus. It's, again, one of the 8 books of Book 3 is the third book within the 8 books that are known as Part 1, which deal with the fundamentals of this of what's the question of what is spirit, the text of what is the Spirit of Laws. And the theme of Book 3 is on the principles of the three governments. So let's go right through, starting with it. Start chapter 1. The difference between the natures of the governments and its principles. After having examined the laws relative to the natures of each government, one must look to those that are relative to its principles. Now, there's going to look at the principles. Remember, he talked about the three governments. They were um, republics, monarchies, and despotisms, right? Republics are where the people are either it's either where the people or part of the people are rulers or sovereign. A monarch is where there's one who is sovereign, but he's restrained by law and rules. And whereas then there's the despotism, whereas there's merely one who is neither ruled by law nor or rules, but rather by his caprices, his caprices and his desires. So he says that therefore they're divided by each one of these will have a principle, he says. There is a difference between the nature of government and its principles. So therefore the nature of the government, which we talked about, right, and its principles. Its nature is that which makes it what it is. Its principle, that which makes it act. So the principle is the action. It's the kind of thing that leads to act, why it acts the way it does. Where the principle, the nature is what it is, right? It is what its character is, what it is, and the principle is why it acts the way it does. The one is the particular structure. The other is the human passions that it sets in motion. So therefore, the nature is its structure, and the principle is with the passions that set in motion. Now, the laws should be no less relative to the principle of each government than its nature. Therefore, the principle must be sought, and I shall do this in this book. So, therefore, this is the question. This is the book that deals with the principles of each of the governments. And he says there's going to be this. Of course, he's going to be the principle should be relative to the type of government. So, therefore, he's going to say that different governments will have different things that cause people to act differently. Okay. Chapter 2 on the principles of the various governments. I have said that the nature of Republican government is that the people are, as a body or certain families, have sovereign power. The nature of a monarchical government is that the prince has the sovereign power, but he exercises it according to established law. The nature of despotic government is that one alone governs according to his wills and caprices. Nothing more is needed for me to find these three republics. Nothing more is needed for me to find their three principles. They derive naturally from this. I shall begin with republican governments. I will speak first of democratic government. Okay, so therefore he goes here. Chapter 3 on the principle of democracy. There needs not be much. Remember, democracy is one of the two possibilities of a republic, right? Um, there needs not be much integrity for a monarch or despotic government to maintain itself. So monarchs and despotics do not need integrity. No integrity. The force of the laws is one, and the prince's ever raised arm is the other, can rule and contain the whole. But in a popular state, there must always be the additional spring, that is virtue. So therefore, a popular state requires virtue. Now, we go back, remember, this is political virtue, not moral virtue in this sense, and it's virtue. What I say is confirmed by the entire body of history, and is quite conformity with the nature of things. For it is clear that less virtue is needed in a monarchy, where the one who sees to the execution of the laws judges himself above the law, than that in a popular government, where one who sees to the execution of the laws feels he is subject to them himself, and he will bear their weight. It is also clear that the monarch who ceases to see the execution of the laws through bad counsel or negligence may easily repair the damage. He has only to change his counsel and correct his negligence. But a popular government, when the laws have ceased to be executed, and this can only come from the corruption of the republic, the state is already lost. In other words, the idea is that if the people is corrupt, in other words, if the people, in other words, a republic and popular government requires virtue, requires the people to have good virtue, has to be good character, because once the people are corrupted, the republic is lost. It's gone. Bye bye. Once the people are corrupted and they have no virtue, no strength, they just do what they want. They ignore the law. They become a despot worse than the worst despot. Right. Um, uh, the state is already lost. It was a fine spectacle in the last century to see the impotent attempts of the English to establish democracy among themselves. This is the story about the English Revolution, the not the Glorious Revolution, but the English Revolution when the Republic was created after King of the Civil War, right? As those who took part in the public affairs had no virtue at all, as their ambition was excited by the success of the most audacious one, and the spirit of one faction was repressed only by the spirit of another. The government was constantly changing. The people stunned, sought democracy, and found it nowhere. And remember, they wanted democracy in the parliament, but it was corrupt. The parliament was corrupt. Finally, after much motion and many jolts and shocks and jolts, when they had come to rest on the very government that had been prescribed, in other words, they returned back to the discussion of monarchy, republic restoration, right, of Charles II. When Sulla wanted to return liberty to Rome, it could no longer be accepted. Rome had but a weak remnant of virtue, and as it had even less, instead of reawakening after Caesar, Tiberius, Cassius, Claudius, Nero, and Domitian, it became even more enslaved. All the blows were struck against tyrants, none against tyranny. So therefore, they killed the tyrant, but they didn't stop the tyranny. Because why the tyrants rise? Because the people were corrupted. The people, in other words, once the people are corrupted, the republic is lost. You can't do it. Sorry. That's the sad story about these things. That's and what is virtue? Virtue is not necessarily morals here. Well, remember, this is the virtue means the idea of citizenship, being those who are engaged in public affairs and the need to do it, and not to merely do it for their own private vestures or their private interests at their own expense, at the expense of the others. In other words, this is the civic mind. You need to be civic oriented. Once the civic sense, when the virtue that is required to be a civic system breaks down, and the people are so depraved or so destruction, then sorry, that's a tyranny. It's gone. Okay. The political men of Greece who lived under popular government recognized no other force to sustain it than virtue. Those of today speak to us only of manufacturing, commerce, and finance, and even luxury. That's right. Look at it. This is the idea. This is the liberals, right? Modern liberals, libertarians out there. All the libertarians. Oh, money, money, money. In other words, commerce, right? Commerce will make virtue. No. Mm-mm. Those today speak only of manufacturing. The ancients spoke of virtue. The moderns speak of commerce and even luxury. When that virtue ceases, ambition enter those hearts that can admit it, and avarice enters into them all. Desire changes their object. That which one used to love, one no longer loves. So desires change their object, so that one used to love, one no longer loves. One was free under the laws. One wants to be free against them. Each citizen is like a slave who has escaped from his master's house. What what was a maxim is now called severity. What was a rule is now called constraint. What was vigilance is now called fear. Their frugality, not the desire to possess, is Their frugality, not the desire to possess, is avarice. Formerly, the goods of the individual made up the public treasury. The public treasury now becomes the patrimony of individuals. In other words, what was the republic is a cast off husk, and its strength is no more than the power of a few citizens and the license of all. There were the same forces in Athens which dominated when it dominated with so much glory when it served with so much shame. It had 20,000 citizens when it defended the Greeks against the Persians. When it disputed for empire with Lacedaemon, and when it sacked Sicily. It had 20,000 when Demetrius of Peleus enumerated them, as one counts slaves in a market. When Philip dared dominate in Greece, where he appeared at the gates of Athens, Athens had as yet lost only time. In Demosthenes, one may see how much trouble was required to reawaken it. Philip was feared as the enemy not of liberty but of pleasures. This town, which had resisted in spite of so many defeats, which had been reborn after its destruction, was defeated at Camerna, as was and was defeated forever. What does it matter that Philip returns all the prisoners? He does not return. He does not return men. It was always easy to triumph over the forces of Athens as it was difficult to triumph over its virtue. In other words, as long as Athens had its virtue was intact, it preserved itself. But once it lost its virtue, it was easily conquered. How could Carthage have sustained itself when Hannibal, as praetor, wanted to keep the magistrates from pillaging the republic? Did they not go and accuse him before the Romans? Unhappy men who wanted to be citizens without a city and to owe their wealth to the hands of their destroyers. Soon Rome asked them to send 300 of their principal citizens of Carthage as hostages. Rome made them surrender their arms and their ships when it declared war on them. Given the things that a disarmed Carthage did from despair, one may judge that may judge what it could have done with its virtue when it was in full force. In other words, example Carthage, right? The Carthage were so fearful of the restraint that the kind of restraint that Hannibal imposed on them of pillaging the republic. They basically surrendered to Rome. They asked Rome for help, and the Romans, okay, surrender yourselves to us, 300 citizens. Made them, and then what made them abandon their ships and their arms? They surrendered them and declared war on them. They surrendered their ships and arms, and then the Romans declared war on them. Right? This is that thing. Now, three. So therefore, if virtue is republic, therefore he says virtue is the principle of democracy. Just as there must be virtue in popular government, here there must also be virtue in aristocratic one. It is true, it is not absolutely required. The people with whom are with respect to the nobles, what subjects are with respect to the monarch, are constrained by the nobles' laws. Therefore, they need virtue less than the people in democracy. But how will the nobles be contained? Those who should see to the execution of laws against their fellows will instantly feel that they acted against themselves. Virtue must therefore be in this body by the nature of its constitution. So, in other words, virtue must also exist in aristocratic government, but less so than in democracy, in a sense, he's saying. In aristocratic government, it has a certain strength in itself that democracy does not have. In aristocratic government, the notables form a body which, by its prerogatives and its particular interest, represses the people, having laws enough to ensure that they be executed. But it is easy for this body to repress the others, as it is difficult for it to repress itself. Such is the nature of the Constitution that it seems to put under the powers of the laws the same people it exempts from them. Pardon. Now, such a body may repress itself only in two ways, either by a great virtue that makes the nobles in some way equal to the people, which may form a great republic, or a lesser virtue, a certain moderation that renders the nobles at least equal among themselves, which brings about their preservation. So, in other words, either a great virtue that makes the nobles in some way equal to their people, um, or a lesser virtue that moderates and renders them, the nobles, at least equals among themselves, which brings them among their preservation. Therefore, moderation is the soul of these governments. In other words, in many ways, that this aristocratic governments need moderation. And I mean moderation founded on virtue, not the one that comes from faint-heartedness and laziness of soul. So again, this is moderation of virtue, not of faint-heartedness and laziness of soul. So get some water in my throat. So I'm dry. That virtue, chapter 5, that virtue is not the principle of monarchical government. So virtue, in monarchies, politics accomplishes very great politics accomplishes very great things with as little virtue as it can. Just as the finest machines, finest machine art employs a few motions, forces, and wheels as possible. The state continues to exist independently of the love of the homeland, desire for true glory, self renunciation, sacrifice of one's dearest interest, all those heroic virtues we find in the ancients and know only by hearsay. So, therefore, this is the virtue means it has love of one country, divide. Love, what is democratic, Republican love is love of the homeland, desire for glory, in that sense, all renunciations of the ancients. The laws replace all these virtues. The laws replace all these virtues, for which there is no need. The state excuses you from them. Here, an action done noiselessly is, in a way, non consequential. Through all crimes, though all crimes are by nature public, truly public crimes are nevertheless distinguished from private crimes, so called because they offend an individual more than the whole society. Now, in republics, private crimes are more public. That is, they run counter to the constitution of the state more than against the individuals. And in monarchies, public crimes are more private. That is, they run counter to individual fortunes more than against the constitution of the state itself. So, in other words, in the republics, private crimes are public, become more public, and in a monarchy, public crimes are more private. I beg that no one be offended by what I have said. I have followed all the histories. I know very well that virtuous princes are not rare, but I say that in a monarchy, it is very difficult for the people to be virtuous. The people, the many, the population is not going to be virtuous. Read what the historians of all times have said about the courts of monarchs. Recall the conversations of men from every country about the wretched characters of the courtiers. These are not matters of speculation, but of sad experience. Ambition and idleness, meanness and arrogance, the desire to enrich oneself without work, aversion to truth, flattery, treachery, perfidy, and abandonment of all one's engagements, the scorns of the duties of citizens, the fear of princes' virtue, the expectation, uh, the expectation of his weakness, and more than all that, the perpetual ridicule cast upon virtue. These forms, I believe, the character of the greatest numbers of courtiers, as observed in all places and all times. This is that famous book by, I forget the name of the author, Shalom. Um, Yeah, dangerous liaisons, less the liaison dangerous. Um, by de Cote 1782, sorry, about the French courts. Famous movie with Glenn Close and I think Malkovich was in it as well, and even young Keanu Reeves and a young Uma Thurman. Um, um, this is a classic movie about this is the kind of how this monarchical regime destroys virtue in a sense. It's the courtiers, right? Um, uh, I believe character in the greatest numbers of courtiers no place in all time. Um, in other words, he says that the weakness is more than this. I believe the character of the greatest numbers of courtiers as a no place. Now, it's very awkward for those most of the principal men of the state to be dishonest people, and from and for the inferior to be good people, inferiors to be good people, for the former to be deceivers and the latter to be consistent, to be and later to consent to be no more than dupes, right? If there is some unfortunate honest man among the people, hence Cardinal Richelieu and his political testament, a monarch should be careful not to employ him. So true is that virtue is not the spring of this government. Certainly, it's not. It is not excluded, but it's not its spring. How virtue is replaced in the monarchical government. I hasten and I lengthen my steps so that none will believe I satirize monarchical government. No. If one spring is missing, monarchy has another. Honor. That is the prejudice of each person in each condition takes the place of the political virtue of which I have spoken and represents everywhere. It can inspire the finest actions, join with the forces of law. It can lead to the goal of government as does virtue itself. Thus, in well-regulated monarchies, one will always be almost a good citizen, and one will rarely find someone who is a good man. For in order to be a good man, one must have intentions of being one, and the love of the state and love the state less for oneself than itself. In other words, this is the idea. Must love its state. In other words, thus in well-regulated models, one will almost be a good citizen, as one will rarely find someone who is really a good man. For in order to be a good man, one must have the intentions of being a good one, and and love the state less for oneself, what benefit can do to you, than love the state itself for itself, not for what it can give you, or when you, or but what you can do for. This is that what you can do for your country. Chapter 7. Monarchical government assumes, as we have said, preeminences, ranks, and even hereditary nobility. The nature of honor is to demand preferences and distinctions. Therefore, honor has in and of itself a place in this government. Ambition is pernicious in a republic. It has good effects in a monarchy. It gives life to that government. And it has this advantage that it is not dangerous because it can be it is not dangerous because it can be constantly repressed. So ambition is great; it can be repressed. In a republic, it can't be repressed that much easily, and it is very dangerous. You could say that it is like this. You could say that it is like the system of the universe, where there is a force constantly repelling all bodies from the center, and a force of gravitation attracting them. In other words, it both repels and the gravity retracts. Right, the power attracts. Honor makes all of the parts of the body politic move. Its very action binds them, and every person works for the common good, believing he works for his individual interests. Speaking philosophically, it is true that the honor that guides all the parts of the state is a false honor. But this false honor is as useful to the public as the true one would be to the individual who could have it. So real honor would be to this idea. The false honor of this is that it moves the system and it's useful to the system. In other words, it's as useful to the public as the true honor would be useful to the individual. So a false honor that keeps the motivations and motivates the system is useful to it as much as real honor is useful to the individual. And it is not impressive that one can oblige men to do all the different difficult actions, and which requires force, with no reward other than the renown of those actions. In other words, it is, and sorry, and is it not impressive? Sorry, is it not? It's negative. Is it not impressive that one can oblige men to do all these different actions which require force, with no reward other than the renown of these actions on it? The fame will do it. Not money, not in other words, no rewards. The rewards are not going to be that. It's going to be that your renown or your fame will do this. That you do. People will do these hard actions, difficult things that people would force have to be doing. Force would be required, but they do it voluntarily in that sense. Why? For not for fame and honor, right? Honor is not okay. Chapter 8. Honor is not the principle in despotic states. Honor is not the principle in despotic states, as all men in them are all equal. One cannot prefer oneself to others, as men in them are all slaves. One can prefer oneself to nothing. Moreover, as honor has its laws and rules, and is incapable of yielding, as it depends on its own caprice and not on that of another, honor can be found only in the state whose constitution is fixed and whose laws are certain. In other words, honors have rules and regulations and guidelines. And honor has a set of codes that are done that determines very complicated. You need laws, you need rules, complicated rules. This is why honor has these. It's why honor, but it was when there was these strict rules of duels and things like this. And all this now. How could honor be endured by the despot? Its glories in scorning life. The despot is strong only because he can take life away. How could honor endure the despot? He it has constant rules and sustains its caprices. The despot has no rules, and its caprices destroy all others. Honor is unknown in despotic states, where even the word to express it is often lacking. It reigns in monarchies, where it gives life to the whole body politic, to the laws, and even to the virtues. Chapter 9. The principle of despotic government. Just as virtue, just as there must be virtue in a republic and honor in a monarchy, there must be fear in a despotic government. Virtue is not at all necessary to it in honor, and honor would be dangerous. So virtue is not necessary to despotic government and honor, but fear is necessary. But there must be fear. The prince's immense power passes intact to those whom he trusts it. People capable of much less self-esteem would be in a position to cause revolution. The people capable of much self-esteem would be in a position to cause revolutions. Therefore, people with honor lovers would cause revolution. Therefore, fear must beat down everyone's courage and extinguish even the slightest feeling of ambition. Moderate governments can as much a moderate government can as much as it wants and without peril relax its springs. It maintains itself by its laws and even by its force. But when despotic government, the prince ceases for a moment to raise his arm, when he cannot instantly destroy all those in the highest places, all is lost. For when the spring of government, which is fear, no longer exists, The people no longer have a protector. Apparently, it was in this sense that the Cadiz claimed that the Grand Signor was not obliged to keep his word or his oath if by doing so he limited his authority. In other words, the idea that you limit, if you need to keep, that needs constant fear. Oh God, coffee. Sorry. Oh, jeez, sorry. The people must be judged by the laws, and the important men by the prince's fancy. So laws, people must be judged by the laws, and the important men by the prince's fancy. The head of the lowest, the head of the lowest subject must be saved, and the pasha's head must always be exposed. One cannot speak of those monstrous governments without shuddering. The Sophai of Persia, disposed by our time by Meresus, saw his government perish before it was conquered because he had not spilled enough blood. In other words, this regime was just despised by him because he didn't kill enough people. I guess the Shah of Iran. In other words, the Shah of Iran was overturned by the revolutionary councils and the Islamic Revolution because he did not, because Jimmy Carter said, "Don't do it. Don't go kill. Human rights. Human rights. Don't kill." Well, what's worse, the Shah and his brutality and his autocratic rule, or the Islamic Revolution? Islamic Revolution killed as much more people. If the Shah just killed 35,000, 50,000 people, again, that's the story of what happened with Pinochet. Pinochet in Spain. Pinochet prevented something far worse by, killing those who he felt was part of the communist things. Yeah, okay, maybe killing some innocent people, but what he did was he prevented something worse from establishing. Oh, how do you know it's going to be something worse? Trust me, every socialist rule has always ended up in, particularly a communist-based socialist rule in Latin America, has not ended well. Look what's happening in Venezuela, right? History tells us that Dominic's horrible cruelties so frightened the governors that the people's receive, the people's revived that the people revived during his reign. In other words, they Dominic's horrible cruelties frightened the governors that the peoples kind of grew up in time. In the same way, a flood destroying everything on one bank leaves stretches of land on the other where the meadows can be seen in a different distance. So that's the thing of the fear. Fear, it destroys the great, the ambitious, and the powerful. The high powerful, and the lowly, and the medium, the slaves are left alone. This is why, in many ways, Corvin Mikke in Poland likes the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Austrian-Hungarian was despotism, and of course, from the point of view of if you're a lowly peasant, lowly guy, this doesn't. The emperor is not cutting your. The emperor and his regime is not crucifying you. Only those powerful people, right? In Roman Empire during its later stages, it was only bad. If you were a lowly guy in the province and it was peace, man, peace, you lived pretty well. But if you were someone of status and power, the emperors would, you'd fear the wrath of the emperors. This is why this is what despotic rule tends to be in that sense, and hence why Corvin and these people. This is why libertarians tend to like despotism. Oh, no laws and no regulations. Everyone can do what they want. Yeah. Okay. No, this is the problem of this theory. That no, this actually ultimately destroys freedom in that sense. Chapter 10. The difference in obedience between moderate governments and despotic governments. In despotic governments, the nature of government requires extreme obedience, and the prince's will, once known, should produce an effect as infallibly as does one ball thrown against another. No tempering, modification, accommodation, terms, alternatives, negotiations, remonstrances. Nothing as good or better can be proposed. Man is a creature that obeys a creature that wants. Okay, this is despotic rule, right? That no, nothing better. My will, my rule, just do it. Anything better? In other words, nothing better, nothing can be proposed. Man is a creature that obeys a creature that wants. He can no longer express his fears about a future, even than he can blame his lack of success on the caprices of fortune. There, men's portions, like beasts, is instinct, obedience, and chastisement. Yeah, they live like beasts. They're no longer humans. They have instinct, obedience, and chastisement. It is useless to counter with natural feelings, respect for a father, tenderness for one's children and women, laws of honor, or the state of one's health. One has received the order, and that's enough. In Persia, when the king has condemned someone, no one may speak to him further about it or ask a pardon. When if he were drunken or mad, the decree would have been carried out all the same. If he were not, he would be um, inconstant, and the laws cannot be inconstant. In other words, the rule is this. It must be his rule. There must be no change to it. This has always been their way of thinking. As an order given by Aburrus to exterminate the Jews could not be revoked, it was decided to give them permission to defend themselves. The Book of Judith, right? But this order by this guy was to kill the Jews. Well, it cannot be done. So instead they give the Jews weapons that they can protect themselves. The Book of Judith, right? That's the story of the Book of Judith, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the Hebrews is Xerxes. Right? This is the Xerxes. I think that's the Book of Judith. I'm not sure. Judith is the account of Xerxes' rule over them, and So, what about this? Um, okay, so they gave permission to. This is why this concept. There is, however, one thing which one can sometimes counter the prince's will. That is religion. So religion can do it. Religion can counter the prince's will. One will forsake one's father and even kill him if the prince orders it. But one will not drink wine if the prince wants it or orders it. The laws of religion are part of the higher precept because they apply to the prince as well as the subject. But it is not the same. But it is not the same for natural right. The prince is not. The prince is not assumed to be a man. So the prince is not natural right. In other words, religious laws. The religion applies to the prince. The laws of nature, natural law right, does not apply to the prince because he's not a normal. A prince is not assumed to be a man. In monarchical moderate states, power is limited by that which it spring by. I mean, honor. The power is limited by that which by that which it springs. Sorry, pardon my medicine is causing these problems. So I mean honor, right? Which reigns like a monarch over the prince and the people. It will not cite the one will not cite the laws of religion to a courtier. He would feel it was ridiculous. Instead, one will insistently cite the laws of honor. This result in necessary modifications of obedience. Honor is naturally subject to eccentricities, and obedience will follow from the wall. So, our honor will do it. Um, though the way of obeying it differs in these two governments, the power is nevertheless the same. In what direction the monarch turns, in whatever direction the monarch turns, he prevails by tipping the balance, and he's obeyed. The whole difference is that in the monarchy, the prince is enlightened and the ministers are infinitely more skillful in public affairs than they are in despotic states. And chapter 11, which ends book 3, such are the principles of the free government. This does not mean that in a certain republic, this does not mean that in a certain republic one is virtuous, but that one ought to be. Nor does it prove that in a certain monarchy there is honor, or that in a particular despotic or that in a particular despotic state there is fear, but that unless there is, the government is imperfect. So therefore, this is the point: is that if there's no honor, and if there's no virtue, is necessary in a republic as honor, respect, and monarchy, and that if it's not there, and we have governments, but these are imperfect ones. They're broken. They're not working right. And here we end the book 3. So if you have any comments, questions, or issues that came up in these chapters, please put them below. Um, if you have any issues and questions about this, you have, please comment. When I see them, I will reply. If you liked it, like it, share it with a friend. If you didn't, I should have said this in my other video. If you didn't like it, you can always say no, but explain why. Um, Another thing you can do is, like I said, if you're not subscribed already, subscribe. Encourage friends to subscribe, like to grow the channel. You can follow me on social media. Links are below. If you want to help contribute, there's means to do it through subscribe to our Patreon, or you can go buy one of my books. You can find it on Amazon or other places, or through Lulu. This is the way you can do this. Again, I hope to see you guys again. Where next chapter we look into chapter 4. Okay, well, take care. Bye bye. Have a good day.